All right, so I thought I would talk a little bit about finding God. Now, I watched a video by Seeker to Seeker, who's a Carl Jung and Buddhism and Christianity guy combined. And one of the things is he said if God is universal, then you can find him in other traditions and so on. Now, I personally believe that that's logically possible. But at the same time, Christianity, for the most part, is where I find the majority of my metaphysical or theological beliefs and so on. And there's a couple of mistakes I think other systems make and so on. But I borrow from Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung, C.S. Lewis, and the Bible, or Doug Wilson and various preachers and pastors. Doug Wilson being one of them, and C.S. Lewis being the greatest apologist of the 1900s that there is for Christianity. Now, Seeker to Seeker mentioned that in Buddhism, the tradition is that Buddha saw a old man Buddha was living in a palace where nothing bad ever happened whatsoever, and everyone was serving him, and he got everything he ever dreamed of, and so on. It kind of sounds vaguely like Abraham in a sense, before God called to him. But Buddha went out to town, the city, and saw an old man, and it gave him nightmares. And then he saw a sick man, and that gave him nightmares. And then he saw a funeral and learned that he would end up like that too, and it gave him nightmares. And then finally he saw a man sitting cross-legged or something under a tree. Maybe he was a bit older, and he was at peace. And Seeker to Seeker says that is Buddha meeting God, basically. And he gets into a little bit about how there's a certain degree of traditional sort of iconography of the Hindu gods or something bowing or kneeling to Buddha, which is simultaneously a reference to the overcoming of the older religion with the newer religion, but also a nod to gods even in Buddhism. And you see the gods of the older traditions bowing to the Jewish and then Christian god and calling them demons and saying they obey God whenever God tells them what to do, even as they're trying to undermine God's will, God Almighty's will, and so on. And that the taunt God Almighty gives them is, "Are you not gods, yet you shall die?" And so on. And yet at the same time, there are traditions like East Greek Orthodoxy or something like that, where they say humans shall become as gods, like a Greek pantheon kind of god, like Ares or Zeus or Aphrodite or Athena or something like that, in terms of their capabilities or power, not their personalities, by the way. They'll still be saints, but they'll be gods in that power range under God Almighty and Christ and so on in heaven. There are traditions in Christianity, Greek Orthodox, that say that. I listened to one Greek Orthodox monk basically saying that on the YouTube channel Athenite Audio. I think it's his second latest one. It's like, let me see if I can find it real quick. I was just listening to it. The Divine Ascension, Metropolitan Hero Theos of Naphaktos, the Feast of the Lord, is the video in particular. So, you know, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. But if you can find God in an old, a sick, and a dead man, and then in a guy who's just meditating on life and the universe and everything, and has his mind open to the experience of life and so on, then that's one way of looking at God. And then tying into that, in a way, is Andrew Klavan's talk with Matt Fradd on Matt Fradd's channel about 6 days ago that I'm currently listening to and had to interrupt because I had this idea for a video. Where, and it's Matt, like Matthew, Matt Fradd, Fradd. That's the YouTube channel name, that's the interviewer's name. And he was talking with Andrew Klavan about Andrew Klavan's last book, so far, latest book, called The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. And Cain, in this case, is Cain and Abel, Cain, the first murderer, and so on. If you want to know, Vampire the Masquerade makes Cain out to be the first vampire ever, and so on. So that's kind of like where that person aligns in terms of morals and so on, and reputation and so on. But Andrew Klavan talks about how art, like actual art, always speaks to some fundamental truth about the human condition. And they started talking about Psycho, the movie, a random murder by two gay guys of a random individual, a murderer in France that got super popular and famous and became a celebrity for not regretting it. And Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov, and how Nietzsche basically is predicted by the book Crime and Punishment, and the nature of wars and random murders by citizens and civilians, and the killing of Jesus before his resurrection, or the Alfred Hitchcock movies, or zombie movies and books and stuff like that in the 90s. The death of God, as Nietzsche predicted, and so on, and his obvious resurrection. It's funny. There's actually a quote that really speaks to the death of God, which is, God has died many times, or our God has died many times. Luckily, we know one that can find his way back from the grave, because he's done it multiple times. Or something along those lines of a quote. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. It's not an exact quote, but it's reasonably close. So, or Christianity has died multiple times, but luckily we believe in a God who can find his way from the grave. I think that's more accurate to the quote. So, you know, but they also mentioned Hansel and Gretel and Dracula as horrifying tales with some element of morality embedded in them in how we view the tale, and it speaks to us on some level. So one of the things Doug Wilson was talking about was plundering the Egyptians. Now, that's a quote from Jesus, I believe, is what he said. And basically, what it means is you're taking from people who aren't Christian, and you're taking what works from them alongside Christianity proper that doesn't that doesn't diametrically oppose Christianity and Christianity's worldview or subvert it necessarily or something like that, and you're taking it into your Christian tradition on some level. And one of the things is that Christianity proper in the medieval era did that with a lot of pagan stuff. The Green Man, gargoyles on churches, um, Merlin being a wizard while not necessarily evil, the Lady of the Lake and the fairies and the elves and so on backing King Arthur as the mighty, justice-driven king of England, who is the rightful ruler, who brings order back to chaos and so on. But for the pagan element of King Arthur, there's also an element of tragedy and hubris and so on. Now, the French took it to a certain degree that is a little, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of necessarily, because they did the guy dirty who is, I can't remember his name, but the movie Green Knight or The Green Knight is about that character, and it kills him off and so on. But in the story that references him and so on, that Tolkien actually wrote the poem book, a poetic book on the story of, which I listened to, Jesse of the Shire on YouTube, read most of, except for some of the gory details. But she read a little bit of the gory details at one point. Sort of to give us a little insight into it, but not all of it. Partly to save time, partly because it's really gruesome and so on. And she was doing a cozy reading. But she did a good job regardless. And it's a good book, and it's written by J.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings, so he's Christian. But I think the guy's name starts with G. Let's see if I can find him. I can't remember the guy's name, and it's really good because I have something to say about him too, which ties into this a little bit in a sense. Sir Gawain. Sir Gawain. Sir Gawain is not the perfect knight. And there's another knight that goes on a quest to find the Holy Grail. And Sir Gawain is the guy who learns from his mistakes in the original King Arthur stuff. So he's the everyman who's noble of character, but he's a little mistaken at times and so on, but he learns from his mistakes and kind of goes better and better as time progresses. That's what the Green Knight is about, basically. It's about a core of honorable nature that is corrupted, that proceeds into sanctification or gradual holiness more and more as time progresses. Learning from your mistakes and not repeating them, and making amends for your misdeeds at times and so on. And all of this ties into the common experience of a convert to Christ, as far as I can tell. A true convert to Christ. There are some people who are performative and say, well, I officially believe Jesus is the Son of God, and I declare that to everyone, But I'm going to act like a raging asshole to those who don't believe, or those who have made a mistake while also believing, and I'm going to be always pointing my finger at other people and declaring them to go to hell. Like that's not necessarily the proper Christian way of putting things. That's one of the reasons why the church emphasizes that everyone but Jesus deserves to go to hell from the beginning. That's why the church does it. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if that's 100% all the time necessarily, or if it's just sort of a turn of phrase to emphasize a direction of humility in one's own mistakes and a little bit of patience or a lot of patience with other people's mistakes. But I'll treat it either. I'll treat it either or. And personally, I flip between the two a little bit, but those are the two positions I take. It's sort of like it's the direction we're supposed to take, or it's absolutely true, and I flip between the two. But I'm roughly there, roughly. You know. Anyways, nobody's perfect. Some people are better. Some people are worse. In different situations, some people are generally worse. Some people are generally better. In multiple situations, but we should practice patience and humility in our discernment. Humility and discernment, not necessarily condemning to hell, but maybe, and not always trying to say, well, I understand why he did it, and therefore murdering those 20 children isn't jailable. Not like you're going to hell or you can do whatever you want without punishment. Neither of those. But a little bit of humility and understanding that you've screwed up as well. And, reading about true evil can often bring one to believe in true good, eventually at least. Because then you're beyond the moral relativism and the postmodernism and so on. You believe in something that's objective and real, finally. And that's often a path to God eventually, as they say in the Andrew Klavan and Matt Fradd interview and so on.